Hello, my name is Andy Connolly and I'm an educator at the Kansas Geological Survey. I'm standing right now in Douglas County between Lawrence and Baldwin City, and this was the furthest extent the glaciers reached during the Ice Age thousands of years ago. But how did we know these glaciers were here? In this video, we will explore the glaciers of Kansas and all the features they left behind in the landscape. Glaciers form from repeated accumulation of snow and ice over years. If the ice doesn't melt, it builds up layers upon layers that can be thousands of feet thick. Through a combination of its immense weight and gravity, the glacier slowly moves forward like a giant amoeba. As it progresses, it churns up the landscape and reworks the soil, which we'll go into more detail later. Polar ice sheets were at their height in the Pleistocene epoch, from 2.6 million to 11,700 years ago. This period of time is also known as the Ice Age, and during this time, there were periods of warmth and cooling, with glaciers advancing and retreating across North America. Twice, glaciers advanced far enough to reach the northeastern portion of Kansas. At their height, the glaciers were thousands of feet thick, but by the time they reached the pinnacle in Kansas, they were only a few hundred. But even at this reduced size, the glaciers changed and morphed the landscape. Acting as a big bulldozer, the glaciers pushed and churned and moved soil and rock across the land. Glaciers even buried ancestral rivers that once flowed across the state. The glaciers affected Kansas without even being directly on top of the land. As the glaciers advanced, the Kansan habitats changed, from an open prairie to a conifer forest to a tundra, and when the glaciers retreated, the habitats reversed back to an open prairie. Giant megafauna, like the mammoths and ground sloths, moved with the habitat and fed on the plants that thrived in this changing world. Their fossils can be found along the Kansas River, which flowed back then as it does today. But how do we know these glaciers were here? We can look at three pieces of evidence. The first piece of evidence is glacier striations. Glacier striations are formed when glaciers carve into the bedrock and leave parallel lines. These lines match the general direction the glaciers traveled. By taking a compass and measuring the striations, we can infer the glaciers moved in a general north to southward trend as indicative of their polar origins. Second, as the glaciers moved across the land, they would churn up and carve the landscape under its immense weight. Rocks were pulverized and ground up into unsorted sediment called glacial till, which was left behind as the glaciers melted. Huge loads of sediment would overwhelm the rivers, and the prevailing winds would create massive dust storms, dropping fine sediment called loess hundreds of feet thick. These thick deposits would create the rolling hills of lush vegetation that we see across the northeastern part of the state, especially in places like Doniphan County. As the soil is loosely compacted, parts of the hill can give way and form a slump, which we can see in this image. This is one of the few areas of Kansas affected by landslides. And finally, and most fun, there are boulders that are so tough and resistant that they were able to resist erosion and were carried for hundreds of miles. These rocks are called erratics, as they seem to just show up in random places with mysterious origins. Most of the boulders in Kansas are a type of rock called Sioux quartzite, a metamorphic rock that was formed from pressurized sandstone. We can trace their original bedrock up north to Minnesota and South Dakota and document the path that they took from their homeland. And as for the erratics themselves, we can find them scattered all across northeastern Kansas, ranging from melon to car size. Whole fields can be covered with these boulders alone, and a special example is in McLouth, where a boulder was so huge that the residents decided to just build a road around it instead of moving it. Throughout the towns and cities of northeastern Kansas, pay attention to the sidewalks, parks, and architecture. You may be surprised how common they are. If you would like to learn more about Glaciers of Kansas, you can travel the Glacier Hills Scenic Byway, K7, which cuts across the tip of our state. There, you can see the amazing Loess Hill deposits and visit the Missouri River. Additionally, you can visit Mount Mitchell Heritage Prairie Park near Wamego, Kansas, where you can find the glacial erratic strewn all over the hillside. And finally, you can visit our website, where you can learn more about the glaciers, the Ice Age, and other geological aspects of our state. See you next time!